it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Well, it really has been way too long since you all joined me around the campfire, hasn't it? This is well overdue if you ask me. 3 delicious tales of terror for you this evening, all about mysterious men and creatures in the forests coming to get you. So, my dear friends, come in a little bit closer, because I've got some stories to tell you. And they go something like this. The Spindler. I want to hear about the Spindler. Logan listened as the voices of his 3 friends talked. He watched as the fire before him dwindled. You sure you want to do that, Lexi? In these woods? Logan's back was firmly set against the back of a broad old oak. He sat on the ground between its roots. His fingers dug unconsciously into the dirt as the flames flickered. Yes, Adam, I do. It's why we came here. Night was upon them now. In the forest it caught between the branches like silk, threatening to fall in around Logan the moment the dim light faded. The fire wouldn't hold it back for long. Okay. Guess you're right about that. Somewhere above the treetops surely sat stars, shining bright as ever, but not through the canopy, not through that physical night. Logan could feel it pressing down on him like the weight of the ocean. Let's do it. You want to start us off, Adam? She stood on the other side of the fire, pacing back and forth, looking to Logan's right. No, Lexi. No, that's a Dom thing, man. Ask Dom. Adam sat there, lazily sprawled sideways across the arms of an old lawn chair. He pointed a beer bottle across the flames, to Logan's left. A voice there responded. I'm not feeling it tonight. Sorry, guys. Logan flinched as the fire reared unexpectedly. A long stick, held by Dom, prodded the fire's heart. The flames hissed and lashed against it like angry vipers. Dom's voice came again. Fire's not long for this world anyways. So, no, Adam. Sorry, Lexi. The stick retracted from the fire, having failed to bring it any new life. Logan glanced towards where Dom sat, rested on an old stump, stick in hand, fire reflecting off his glasses. He just shook his head. Oh, come on, Dom, please. Do it for me. Logan felt nauseous as Lexi's voice pleaded. Adam's followed. Yeah, do it. Might as well, right? And who cares about the fire anyways? Makes it better without it. Darker, scarier. Logan felt Lexi's eyes on him from across the fire. He turned his gaze down, away from the fire and into his lap. He shuddered when he heard her voice ask, You okay, baby? He closed his eyes. There was laughter to his right. Is he okay? I think it's pretty obvious he's not. I mean, look at him. Logan wrapped his arms around his chest as the weight of the night became a cold sting on his skin. The hair on his arms stood erect. His chest shuddered as Lexi's voice yelled, Adam, stop it! She was moving, to his left, around the fire, towards him. Oh, Adam has a point, Lexi. This might not be best for it. She sat down, right next to Logan. He gasped. Her hand was on his shoulder, massaging him. The other one slipped in through his matted hair. This is exactly what he needs. He was the one who wanted to come up here in the first place, to face his fears, right, baby? Logan didn't move. Yeah, but what's the point if you don't want to play along? Look at him, Lexi. He won't even listen to the story. He's just going to play along. That's that. Sorry, Dom. Logan won't play. The hands crept down his body, one down his neck and one down his arm. The one on the arm wrapped around his bicep and squeezed. Then a whisper. You'll be fine. Just play along. The trees rustled, but Logan felt no breeze. He kept his eyes closed tightly. Lexi's voice grew louder. "He's going to be fine, Dom. Please, tell the story." Logan heard the stick enter the fire once more. It brushed against the ashes. Charred logs fell. Embers hissed as they floated away, drowned by the night. "Logan, can you look at me?" They waited, but Logan knew they wouldn't wait long. The hand gripped around his arm gave a tender but meaningful squeeze, the kind that meant, without saying the word, "Please." A familiar kind of squeeze, one that had lost all of its magic. "Baby, look at Dom. Please." Her words were a special kind, light to hear but heavy with implication, the implication that she wouldn't ask again. Logan opened his eyes. "What do you want to know about the Spindler?" Logan could see Lexi's hair, the outline of her face that glowed like amber in the dying light of the fire. Her eyes were hidden by shadow. Dom pushed his glasses back up his nose with his free hand, gripping his long fire prod that sat resting on his lap with the other. He shifted a little around the stump he sat on, waiting on an answer. "Well, baby?" There was only one answer to give, but Logan didn't want to give it. "Don't." Logan shook his head. "Please, don't." Her hand caressed his hair. Air whistled across the mouth of the beer bottle. Laughing again from Logan's right. "Told you, didn't I? Told you he won't play." Taunting, abrasive, just like Adam. The hand fell to his neck. Logan felt the nails scratching his skin gently. Very gently, then less so. "I only know its name," Logan stated quickly. "That's it, I swear. I only know its name." He remembered she wouldn't ask again. The nail stopped scratching and the hand relaxed. Logan continued. "You don't talk about it. You don't. Well, kids do when they're young. When they're bad. It's like sex. You talk about it when Mom's back is turned. You talk about it in the dark. You giggle about it with friends. You lie. I know nothing about the Spindler, I swear." Her arm wrapped around his waist. He shuddered as her head touched his shoulder. "Good job, baby." There was a glimmer from the bottle and a chuckle. Logan couldn't help but look. Adam was hunched over in the seat now, staring down at the ground. Between his legs he toyed with the beer bottle, spinning the base around in circles. He raised it to his lips. That's a lie, Logan. You know more than that, man. You gots to. You know more than a name. Dom knew more than that. Lexi knew more than that. You know it lives here, in these woods, where Mommy and Daddy tell you not to go." He lifted the bottom of the bottle to the shadows above. He sighed in refreshing satisfaction. "He's not totally lying, Adam. I don't think anyone knows anything about the Spindler. Not really. Hell, I'd be surprised if either you or Lexi knew anything more than this. No one goes in these woods, not since long ago, but I guess we're proof that even that isn't true. Lots of people go in here. Lots of people, and most never come out." Lexi's head shifted. "How long ago?" Logan squirmed. Lexi's hand was cold on his back. She held him tight. He had no energy to fight back. In Dom's lenses, the flames were almost mesmerizing, but still fading. Flames barely crackled as the answer was given. "Ancient. The Spindler is ancient. So is this forest. No one can imagine how long. No one would want to. When the natives came, they found it. They let it be. Can you imagine? With how many tales you've heard of skinwalkers, wendigos, and every evil spirit that they could have imagined, would you ever believe there was one so bad that they just pretended that it never existed?" The question was punctuated by a crack outside the dome of safe light, somewhere beyond. Nothing followed it. Nothing emerged. Nothing else moved. Not even bugs chirped in the dark. Silence. Logan turned, but only he moved. The only part of Lexi that moved was her mouth. Is that why we avoid it? Because they did? Silence. No, Lexi, I guess it's got something to do with instinct. I know Logan feels it. The weight of this place. Other forests have a pulse. They're alive, in motion. This one, it's static. It's dead. Like the world doesn't move here. Almost 1,000 acres. And I think it particularly unnerves people when something is dead, yet it still looks back at you. The flames came less and less. A deep orange burned at the heart of the embers, but nothing more. Logan could almost feel the cold night lapping against his back, like cold black waves. Soon not even the tree would make him feel safe. Well, that's nice and flowery and all, Dom, but what is it? The Spindler? What is it, man? Over Adam's voice, he heard something more. Was that another crack? Logan couldn't bring himself to look. It had come from the other side of Lexi, higher than the ground, surely. Her head didn't move. All depends on what you've been told, I suppose. Some say it's a spirit. A rather mundane explanation, if you ask me. Others say it's evil incarnate. But I think that's a bit too presumptuous. A little melodramatic. I think that it just is. Lexi's jaw moved. What do you mean? Dom fixed his glasses once more with his free hand, his face angled up towards the canopy. Hell, if I know, but it's the senseless that makes the most sense when it comes to the Spindler. You have to think a bit outside the box. His face snapped down towards Logan as a question was asked. What do you think the Spindler looks like, Logan? Logan didn't want to answer, even though he could. The image in his head lived horribly there, and even worse, it fit just beautifully in the darkness above. He pictured it there, sitting, watching. He pictured and said, a spider. A giant spider. There was a sigh. Logan held his head down away from the canopy. That's what most people assume. I've heard the same many times. Spider with 1,000 eyes and a beaming human smile. One that crawls across the canopy, living between the tops of the trees. Maybe one with legs as thick around as tree trunks. But I've also heard that it looks like a man, monstrous with fangs and claws for fingers. Then I've heard more. Some more man-like, others more beastly, and yet some follow none of those. Most intriguing tales will tell you that the Spindler is an abstraction. There was surely another crack, maybe two. In the woods beyond the fire, past an impenetrable wall of night, something lurked. Logan was the only one who cared. There was a chuckle from Adam's side of the fire. What the hell is that supposed to mean? You know what he's talking about, Lexi? Logan felt her shoulders rise in a shrug. It means, Adam, that the Spindler just is, but it isn't. It has a form when it wants, and when it doesn't, and it simply isn't. It doesn't live in the canopy. It is the canopy. The darkness that blocks the sun, the stars. The darkness that follows you and descends upon you with claws and teeth. Logan's breaths came in rasps. Lexi's hands had stopped massaging him. Logan didn't even realize, nor did he notice, that only a lone flame still flickered in the fire pit. He didn't even notice that the snapping in the distance, the footsteps of someone or something, had become regular. He could only focus on the layer of night that loomed above, thick enough to block the heavens. Sounds came from there as well. Do you know why people think it looks like a spider? Lexi's arm raised, ready to answer Dom's question. Oh, I know. It's because of the webs, isn't it? The black webs. Perhaps the sounds were natural, but Logan didn't believe that at all. The sounds surrounded them. Logan's eyes darted around, and they caught something different. Adam was standing, holding the bottle up to his lips. Yeah, the black webs. The Spindler always leaves them about the forest, hanging them in single strands wherever he chooses. Adam didn't say a word. Not anymore. He just lowered his bottle and his face hung towards the fire. Only the voices of Lexi and Dom continued. And you get stuck in them, right, Dom? People get stuck in them. The sounds were getting closer. Footsteps, they had to be. But in the trees as well. Like helpless flies, Lexi. People go into these woods and the Spindler sees that they never come out. See, the webs are made out of the same darkness that the Spindler himself is. And they're so thin, you can only ever see them if you're looking for them. Yet once they have you, they won't let go. Oh, you can scream. In fact, it lets you scream. The Spindler, it watches all. Footsteps. Too many to count. Every direction. And then, when it has you, it keeps you. You belong to the Spindler, Lexi. Logan, you belong to the woods. Tears welled in Logan's eyes. What does it do with those it keeps, Dom? Tell us about them. The scarecrows. Logan's heart dropped. Too hard to breathe. He gasped. The scarecrows are what the Spindler does for fun. You listen to those the Spindler lets leave the forest because that's the only way you get out. It has to let you. Listen to those lucky few and they'll tell you about the scarecrows. The scarecrows are the ones it mutilates, twists, and contorts. They're the ones it hangs, hanged by the same black threads they were ensnared onto to make it easy for the Spindler to do whatever it pleases with them. And he likes to do a whole lot with them. He likes to drop them right in front of people, far away in the distance. Doesn't matter, 'cause he'll make them move, just a bit by tugging on their strings. Maybe he'll make them dance, run at you. Some say it copies voices well enough that it sounds all too human when the corpses scream at you in vain. Oh, they shout warnings, tell you to run. Run right into its traps, using its victims' voices. Logan tried to stand, tried to run, but Lexi held him down. Her face didn't look away from Dom. Hold on, baby. We're almost at the end. What else does the Spindler do, Dom? It's not just silly scarecrows, is it? Logan struggled, but her grasp was firm. Well, like I said, it only makes scarecrows out of the boring ones. Losers. Losers, but the rest? Well, it does keep them a bit longer. What it does with them in the long run, who knows? They don't leave here. Their bodies aren't found. Maybe they become part of it. Maybe they're the fuel that keeps it going. Until then, it makes use of you, plays with you, toys with you, for as long as it can. The advancing footsteps reached a crescendo. Logan knew they were surrounded. No way out. The flame died and the noises stopped. Almost like they were waiting. Oh, it makes you a puppet. Dom stoked the flame, and for just a moment Logan saw them, surrounding the fire pit, on every side, faceless, naked bodies. The footsteps had stopped, leaving only Dom's voice clinging to the chilling air. And it's really good at it. Really good. Good at voices. Adam laughed, bringing the bottle that had been empty for the last hour up to his lips. Good at motions. Dom, his hand wrapped closely, irreversibly around the long stick, drew it from the fire pit and set it on his lap. His voice finished from somewhere up above, and it's very, very good at making it seem all so real. As the light faded for the last time, Logan felt Lexi's hand on his chin. It made him look. He saw them again as he had hours before. From Lexi's pale eyes, from the center of her pupils, emerged two thin strands of black webbing. They reached upwards into the night, to the Spindler. Her mouth moved before the darkness crashed around him, and a voice echoed from somewhere up above. What do you think, Logan? Do you believe? Mr. Trenchfoot. I know the topic of scary or rather disturbing stories from our childhoods are outdated and furthermore considered cliché, but I thought you might like this one. This one was from my high school years, Well, I wasn't always rebellious. In fact, I was a good kid. I wasn't what you'd call an angel of a child, but I was still keeping up appearances, had good grades, was disciplined enough, had pretty well developed manners. And I hung out with this delinquent, Cody. He was an asshole, the biggest one you'll ever meet. Nobody really liked him, but he was quite wealthy, and while his parents were away, he'd throw huge parties that half of the 10th grade students from my high school would go to. I was always invited to these, but he always started the parties late at night, around midnight. Well, his last party did at least, which meant my parents wouldn't let me go, so I didn't even bother asking. I know it wasn't my nature, and now that I look back, it was a really stupid choice, but I decided I'd sneak out. My dad stayed up till 11 every night, and never emerged from his bedroom until the following morning, and my mum always slept till noon, using beauty sleep as her excuse. Well, time came. It was the night of the party. It was about 11:30, and my dad had already stumbled into his bedroom and proceeded to snore loudly. I slowly twisted the handle on my door to reveal the inky blackness of the hallways. Now would be the perfect time to escape. Well, if not now, never. He lived pretty far away. It'd take at least an hour to get there by foot, so I softly closed my door and lightly paced towards our sliding glass door. I opened it slowly, and it must have been a minute before there was an opening big enough for me to squeeze through. Once I was through, I took no risk and took another minute to close it again. I was outside, and the moon illuminated the ground quite well. Well, I lived in a desert area, and there were really no threats at night, save for coyotes, but they rarely attack. I kept a pocket knife on me, however. They were usually more scared of you than you were of them, but this was just a precaution. You can never be too careful out there. There's also a fair amount of shady people for such a small town, but that didn't worry me. The terrain was rugged and difficult to navigate. I had to dodge tall brush and jump over eroded crevices in the earth. I checked my watch. It was about 12:15. I knew I must be close because I saw a familiar house that I always passed while walking on the sidewalk to get to Cody's. Only a couple more blocks, and I'd have made it. The terrain had gotten surprisingly less jagged and smoother after a couple of minutes. The ground was mainly free of rocks and other obstructions, save for beer bottles and some dried-up bushes. But there was one thing that caught my eye. It was a brown, torn tub, lying next to the side of the ditch I was walking through. I stopped for a moment and observed it, before my curiosity managed to claw its way through, and I slowly approached it. That's probably just trash, but for some reason I felt inclined to see what it was. Well, I nudged it with my foot, and a tall figure rose swiftly from under the cover. I was knocked back and frozen with fear. It was a bear-like creature that wore a dark brown trench coat and dusty brown pants. He was barefoot, and his feet were larger than any creature I know of. While this bear-like creature stood up, it had to have stood taller than 6'5", towering over me. Long white hair protruded from every visible inch of body that there was, almost like an animal. Its glossy eyes met mine, and I was ready to run. I managed to stutter out a few words. I stopped, examining the creature once more. "What are you?" Well, the figure looked at me again and let out a loud, hearty chuckle. He wiped a few tears of joy from under his eyes and gave me a smile. "Why, my boy, I am Mr. Trenchfoot," he said, still grinning at me. His tone was nothing short of friendly, and that was the only thing stopping me from making a mad dash back to my house. He gave me a puzzled look and asked, "Do you, by any chance know the date?" Well, I thought he was joking at first, and I laughed a bit, but then I saw his serious expression. I stuttered again, and managed to collect myself. "It's June 7th, I said. He looked quite shocked, or rather intrigued. He looked at me again, and my eyes met his once more. My, I've been asleep quite a long time. It was November last time I was awake," he said, still sounding jovial. "Now tell me, What have I missed? Well, we strangely got into a conversation, and it lasted a good 15 minutes. He asked me about politics and celebrities, and nothing too serious. We spoke for a while. I looked down at my watch and noticed the time. I had about 16 minutes to get there before it hit 1. I sat up from the rock on which I'd previously rested. "I have to get going," I said. Mr. Trenchfoot stood up and wiped dirt off his coat and coughed before speaking. He walked towards a storm drain that seemed to lead into blackness. "Follow me," he said, entering it. "I need to show you something." His voice was all too friendly and inviting. He crawled further into the pipe, and soon he was enveloped in the darkness. I dared not enter, and stood there for a while. Well, he turned, and the only reason I knew that is because the little bit of moon illuminated his eyes, just as it would a dog's or a cat's. I stepped back a bit, a little frightened, and reminded him I had to go. "Come here," he said softly. He repeated this, and each time he got more angered and menacing. "Come here. Come here. Come here." He inched forward just enough so I could see him fully, while long black claws protruded from his fingers. He clawed the sides as he repeated, "Come here now. Come here now." Well, I ran as fast as I could back up the ditch I was walking in, daring not to look back to see if he was following until I was at a safe distance. After about a minute of running, I looked back and was relieved. He didn't follow. He stood, watching as the moon outlined his figure. I continued to run as fast as I think I've ever run. I hopped over my fence, this time not cautious of not making any noise, and I ran inside, tired and frightened. My dad heard my entrance and ran to see what the cause of the noise was. I explained that something had tried to attack me, and he called the police without hesitation. I explained to the police what had happened and what I'd seen. Well, they took no time at all to rush to the area and investigate. No sign of Mr. Trenchfoot. I was at the scene watching them at a safe distance with my mum and dad. I'd shown the chief the drain pipe that Mr. Trenchfoot had tried to lure me into. He took no time at all to motion several armed men inside. They didn't find him, though, and they still haven't to this day. So, that's my story. Pretty creepy, right? Well, things have been the same. I got grounded for a couple weeks, but they let me off because they were glad I was safe. So, you could say this had a happy ending. I guess for me, at least. But I still haven't told you the best part. Well, you know how I said they didn't find him? Well, when they kicked open a grate, they entered a concrete room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. Again, they didn't find Mr. Trenchfoot in there. However, they did find something. They found Mr. Trenchfoot's tarp in there, still as dusty as ever. There was no sign of Mr. Trenchfoot, or any life for that matter. There was another thing in the room. In the far corner of the dark, cold concrete shelter was a pile of bloody, torn clothes, all of them belonging to children in my town who'd gone missing in the last 20 years. The Moose Man.
What if you get attacked? What if you catch a disease? What if you... I silenced my childhood friend, and, at the time, high school sweetheart Brian, with a finger over the mouth. Brian was a protective boyfriend, occasionally to an annoying extent. Despite this, I loved spending time with him. I suppose the fact we'd known each other since 3rd grade helped out. It's only 3 nights. I'll be back before Christmas. Besides, I have my knife, and my dad's bringing a rifle. I would pay to see a wolf try to handle the power of a .22. I wasn't. We were suddenly cast into darkness by the gas-powered lamp which had previously lit up the inside of our clubhouse going out. I sighed and moved the piece of plywood which acted as the door. Sunlight flooded the walls and floor, and we both gave a sharp inhale at the assault on our eyes. I exhaled as my eyes adjusted to the outside, and I got up to leave. Our clubhouse was constructed within an old gravel pit, which was used as a trash storage by the nearby supermarket and the construction crew which built it. The high mountains of grey rocks were surrounded and covered by empty boxes, spare 2x4s, and sheets of corrugated tin and plywood alike. We'd assembled our house over the span of 3 days. 2 2x4s had been driven into the sides of the gravel mountains, which created a short canyon near the back. Plywood and metal was used for the wall in which we had installed our door, as well as the roof. An old nail gun was stashed in one corner, in case a drunk or hobo wandered in while we were there. It only had enough gas to fire a few shots, but we only had 3 nails, so it didn't matter. A tarp had been used for insulation, as well as a way to keep the sunlight from leaking in. We'd used one of my dad's old gas-powered camping lamps to light it up. A lamp which was now out of fuel. Brian followed me out of the clubhouse, giving a slight grunt as he moved the plywood door back in its place. I pecked him on the cheek as we said our goodbyes, and we rode in separate directions on our bikes. One day, and a 4.5-hour drive later, we were at the back of the campground. The park ranger gave us our favourite, a 20 years of membership reward. The site was larger than the rest, and had a few layers of seclusion provided by the verdant July pines. I was hunting around for rocks to use as a fire ring, and my dad was assembling his tent with the effortless perfection of an Eagle Scout. The birds chirped, and something large, an elk or maybe a moose, crashed around in the trees just out of sight. That night, as we sat around the crackling flames, I found myself watching the tree line. The great pines seemed darker than usual, their shadows more pronounced. In fact, their shadows seemed to swallow the forest entirely, blocking sight for anything more than 5 feet in. Movement. It was fast, less than a second long, but whatever had moved, it was huge. It looked like a man, but it was almost 8 feet high. Its arms were long, and what I can only describe as lumpy, like twisted tree limbs come to life. Its back legs were animalistic, and curved back before ending in long, curved talons, like a combination between wolf and eagle. Its hands were almost human, but its claws were almost perfectly straight. They reminded me of the paper claws you would fold in 4th grade and pretend to be some fearsome beast come recess. But this was no man in costume. In one hand, it clutched a deer by its neck. The creature was dead, and scarlet trails slithered down the obsidian claws. The kill was only barely touching the floor. What struck me most about the thing was its face. It was covered in a great mask. It reminded me of one of those cow skulls that you see in every Western movie, but it was elongated and far too thin. Instead of curved, thick horns, there were wide antlers. They ended in sharp points, which were coated in a brownish-red substance that trickled down like paint. Hey, you all right? I split my mind from the trance I'd developed and pulled the sausage, now a blackened crisp likened to a cattail, from the fire. I inspected it, then chucked it into the fire. I grabbed a new one and impaled it on my stick before returning it to the fire. My dad took a bite out of his. "Oh, you look like you've seen a dead body." I pondered this before responding with, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a wolf or something." "You want me to take a few warning shots?" my dad asked with a chuckle, before drawing out the long rifle from the other side of the log. No way. I'd rather not get kicked out on our first night. My dad took another bite from his sausage. I withdrew mine from the fire and loaded it into a bun before adding a stripe of hot sauce. I looked back to the trees. Whatever I'd seen there was gone. How very naive of me. I woke up at, according to my watch, 2:27 a.m. in my one-person tent 40 feet away from my father and 30 from the picnic table which held our gun. In its case, my dad isn't a moron. I sat up in my sleeping bag, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My toes, despite the 20-degree sleeping bag, were freezing. I wrapped my hand around them, encased in their wool socks, while I tried to figure out why I'd woken up in the first place. The interior of my tent was warm enough to keep me asleep. The crickets were a sound I was used to as a Colorado native. I finally realized the second set of breathing 5 minutes after I woke up. I couldn't imagine how I'd missed it. It was extremely heavy, but it wasn't my dad. He snored, but he didn't snore that loud. It was likely an elk. I figured they were creatures of the night, and if it were a wolf, I could try to stun it with my flashlight and yell for my dad to get the gun. If it was some pervert who'd found his way to me, then I'd get the gun and deal with the problem myself. My fingers found the cold ocean blue steel body of my flashlight. My thumb pressed against the nylon-covered button on the back. I got ready to yell, and then swung. The moment my light turned on, the tent was flooded with a synthetic yellow light from the flashlight. I scrunched my eyes together, and I heard who, or whatever was outside, hiss in surprise and pain. My eyes adjusted to the light, and I got a good look at the silhouette of my nighttime visitor. I nearly relieved myself when I saw it. The antlers extended wider than my light allowed, but the sharp, spear-like points were all too familiar. I saw the small, half-centimeter-high ridge that protruded down the skull-like mask of it. The arms were great bowels come to life in the form of powerful arms, and the front claws were almost perfectly straight, but had sharp triangular points, an almost exact copy of the origami claws of my youth. One of its hands covered its eyes to block the sunlight. I let out a trembling breath, hoping, praying to every single deity I could imagine, Odin, Ra, God, even the driving force beyond cosmology, that whatever was near to my tent would retreat back to the shadowy tree line. It put down its hand, and I gave a single, high-pitched scream at what I saw. The dark silhouette of the head and body was blocking the light, but the eyes were non-existent. 2 golden circles in the mask which let the night through. Its head cocked to one side, and then, as if I were dreaming, it repeated the sound. It was like I'd heard a recording played back to me underwater. As it repeated my terrified grasp, the eyes flickered, as if they suddenly filled with smoke. From far away, there came footsteps. The creature turned its head towards my father, then got up. The shadow of mangy fur surrounding its lower legs came into view. Then it stalked off towards the trees. No less than a minute later, someone else was outside my tent. My dad unzipped the tent flap and peered inside. Dark shadow supported his eyes, which looked concerned. You okay? Thought I heard screaming. I'm fine. Just a nightmare is all. His face turned from concern to empathy. If you want to sleep in my tent, I guess I can spare some space. No, it's fine. I just want to sleep. My dad ran a hand through his beard, then closed the tent flap. I shut off my flashlight and squirmed down into my sleeping bag. I was re-enveloped in the tendrils of sleep before 2:45. I woke up to the scent of campfire-cooked pancakes, and the voices of 2 men, as well as my father, engaged in conversation. I yawned and rubbed my eyes. I straightened my hair using my pillow and pulled on a pair of pajama pants as well as a tank top. I slipped my feet into my flip-flops and crawled out of the tent. My dad was speaking to 2 park rangers. One of them said something, and my dad motioned to the rifle, making another unintelligible comment. The ranger looked at it, then looked to the other ranger, who shook his head. The first ranger said something to my dad and asked a question in turn. Nobody had noticed yet that I was here. I caught only a few lines of the conversation. "So, you're sure you saw nothing?" the first ranger asked. "Yeah, maybe a deer and a few campers, but nobody else," my dad said. "Any nighttime occurrences? Nightmares? Strange visions? Sudden blackouts?" the second ranger responded. "Well, my daughter had one last night. She had her flashlight on and everything. She seemed freaked out. Face was pale." "When did this happen?" the first ranger questioned, apprehensive. They each had one hand hovering over their service pistols. I don't know. 2:30 maybe?" "Hey, Dad. I smelled pancakes." The rangers were at ease after this comment, and my dad looked over, startled. "Good morning, eh? These rangers wanted to know if you saw anything last night." "Well, there was the nightmare. Other than that, just you. Hey, did we bring syrup this time?" I neglected to mention the thing which I had nicknamed the Moose Man, out of fear for the park ranger's actions, and if the Moose Man had some way to hear everything I said. I poured syrup over the yellow cakes, took a bite with my plastic fork. The rangers smiled and said their goodbyes to me and my dad. One of them muttered something to my dad. His face fell. He placed another log on the fire and then told me to watch it while he relieved himself. I looked down to the fire, poking at it with a stick I'd used to cook the sausage last night. I figured it would make an effective spear if the Moose Man returned. Then I remembered our rifle. I turned around to run a finger down the cool wooden body, but it wasn't there. I looked up to my dad, and my suspicions were confirmed. My dad had walked into the tree line. Slung over his shoulder was the rifle. My dad returned a few minutes later, rifle still on his shoulder. I'd asked him why he'd taken it with him. "Well, there were some giant tracks outside of your tent when I woke up this morning. Looked like they come from a wolf the size of a bear. Didn't want to get jumped, so I brought the gun. Hope I didn't scare you." Now, when people lie, they always do something. They talk animatedly with their hands. They look down. They use and more often. For my dad, well, he runs his hand through his beard. He did this as he gave his answer, then quickly set the rifle back down on the table. He poured more batter into the pan, and I looked at the rifle. The safety was off. The world was normal up until that night. We had ham and barbecue sauce sandwiches for lunch, the wonders of camping food, and campfire cooked hot dogs for dinner. Yes, again. The key difference was that, this time, my dad and I brought out an old Dutch oven. Dutchy peach pie was a camping tradition in our family. 1 can of peaches, with syrup, sandwiched between the layers of flaky crust, and topped with powdered sugar. It was delicious if done right, but doing it right took almost 3 hours. By the time we were finished, it was almost midnight. My dad had just lifted the top of the Dutch oven off to check the pie, when we heard something that chilled us to the bone. Imagine a wooden creak sound, but almost twice as high-pitched and 10 times as loud. The birds in the trees flew to the sky, cawing, hooting, and twittering as they flapped away. The crickets and frogs were silent. I wouldn't be surprised if the whole campsite was awoken by the loud, screeching rumble. I looked at my dad, who was watching me. "What the hell?" I asked, dumbfounded. My dad's head snapped around. Coming from the thin layer of trees that separated us from the rest of the campsite was the unmistakable sound of twigs and leaves crunching beneath feet. I grabbed my knife, and my dad pointed the rifle towards the shrubbery, which was violently gyrating back and forth. My dad's finger was curled around the trigger, ready to send a shot into whatever was going to burst forth at any moment. "Hey, stay behind me." A park ranger, who wasn't one of the first two, came forth from the trees. My dad lowered the rifle, and I placed my knife back on the table. The ranger stumbled over a tree root and looked around. In one hand he held a flashlight, which was off. In the other, a giant silver revolver. "You guys the only ones here?" he yelled out. Yeah, just me and my daughter." The ranger stepped forward. He didn't put his gun away. "You see anything strange? Any bones, antlers, large creatures?" "No, nothing since." The bush line twitched near my tent. It was a small movement. The ranger pointed the gun and flashlight at it and turned the light on. It was a raccoon. The creature pawed around at the ground, picking up and eating small items we couldn't see. It zigzagged back and forth, sometimes returning whatever he picked up to the dirt. "Station, this is 17. Raccoon near 110. No sign of 2 or Beta. I'll call in with any update." The ranger shone his light back to the raccoon. It was gone, but there was something on the ground in front of my tent. The ranger walked forward to it and lifted it up. I could barely make out what it was, but it was curvy and human-shaped. The ranger looked at it for a few seconds, then turned around and looked toward me. He looked at the thing's back. His eyes widened. He yelled into his radio and then ran back towards me, his gun trained on the trees. He got back to us and turned towards me. "Ma'am, did you see anyone other than your father tonight?" "No. What?" "Sir," the ranger said, turning towards my dad, "if you or your daughter have seen anything, and I mean anything, then you have to let me know, okay?" The solemn look on his face said it all. I said nothing. That night, despite the pie, a slice of which the ranger politely declined, was the single, unequivocally worst night of my life. It started around 1:30 a.m., a series of long, heavy footfalls, like snow crunching beneath the ground. Then I heard the breathing. When I was 5 years old, we lived in a house which had one of those old furnaces, the ones which could roar like a strange tone, with the occasional click. That furnace terrified me. The breathing I heard reminded me of this furnace. I heard the unmistakable creak of wood, followed by the soft thump of something hitting leaves and twigs outside my tent. The breathing slowed. Then I heard the soft clink of metal on metal. My hand shot out, grabbing my flashlight from the bag, then shifting my shirt to the side, drawing my knife. It flipped open with a click that was music to my ears. I leaned forward, preparing to launch myself. If it was who I think it was, I would drive the blade into one of the long nose slits of that horrible mask. The tent flap slowly unzipped. With a blood-curdling scream, I flew forward, but the moose man was ready for me. He folded to one side, and I dropped into the dirt. I whirled around, but the moose man was on top of me. He was surprisingly heavy. The mask was even larger up close. I could have reached out and not even got my fingers around the tip of the antlers. He let out another one of those ripping screams we'd heard from earlier that night. I was overcome with terror. Then I remembered my knife. I looked to one side. The handle was a few inches away from my fingers. I struggled to reach it, but the moose man was keeping me in place. It placed a hand on my right shoulder. The claws acted as a cage for my arm. It reached its other hand up, ready to strike. I lunged sideways, wrapping my hand around my knife. I thrust it forward, straight into where the eye should have been. The blade hit what felt like stone. The beast cried out and slammed its hand down to where my head had been a second earlier. I slipped downward. I slammed my elbow into the knee of the thing. It stumbled down, then reared up to its full height. I made a dash for my drop knife. The beast reached up to his mask and pulled. I only caught a glimpse of what was under its mask. I was overcome with an extreme wave of nausea. I closed my eyes and looked away. From somewhere else, someone, my father, yelled. 2 gunshots cracked the night. I heard a second voice, one who I presumed to be a park ranger, yelling something out. Another volley of gunshots rang through the air. The beast roared its furnace-like roar. There were 3 heavy footfalls, then the unmistakable sound of someone dropping. At least 6 rushed footsteps approached. More gunfire. The beast roared and scampered away. The trees returned to normal, and the gunshots stopped. Someone grabbed me by the shoulders. I shrieked and kicked my dad in the shin. He gave a heaving groan. Someone else grabbed my legs, and a second man took my arms. I looked at the 2 rangers' faces, both plastered with fear. My breathing slowed. My tears stopped, and the rangers relaxed. It took almost 2 hours for me to tell my story. Another 1.5 for my dad to tell his. We were both held in the Rangers Station jail, under guard by a huge man with a gun to match. By the time everything was figured out, the other campers were cooking on the fire, talking about all the sounds that they'd heard. Site 2 was empty. A great plastic wall had been erected around it, but it didn't do much to hide it from view. I saw the silhouette of a great statue, like the one the ranger had found near my tent. This one was almost as tall as the moose man himself, and there was the shredded shadow of the tent behind it. Before I could even inquire about it, a ranger saw me staring and escorted us back to our site. We were back home by lunchtime. We were told to tell our acquaintances that the campsite had been closed early due to a small fire nearby. It would not likely do any damage, but hey, better safe than sorry. As far as I can tell, nobody knows about the Moose Man. I've tried to forget the whole thing, and hope that writing this story helps with that. Because, well, every few weeks, I have this nightmare. I'm running through the woods, and I can hear something behind me. It is large and fast. I trip over the wall, and I turn around to see the Moose Man thundering towards me. It stops when I can see his mask. I wake up, and I see the shape burned into my vision. I love the Colorado Rockies. So 3 tales of terror for you this evening. Well, it really has been a long time since I've done a campfire theme video, and I don't know, there's something about the whole concept that really appeals to me. It just seems like a really nice setting to be telling people stories like this. So I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, I haven't done one for ages. Let me know your thoughts, feelings, desires in the comment section below the video, and I'll see what I can do. Maybe I'll do that again very soon. I've been doing some of the rock song themed creepypastas recently, and they've been going down really well. So if you want more of those, let me know too.
Okay, so that's Wednesday. Podcast time tomorrow night. Please join me for the podcast. Wherever you get your podcast from, you'll find mine there. Dr. Creepin's Dungeon. And back here on Friday. Not sure what yet, but it's Friday. I always do something, don't I? Well, till next time. Very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.